Here is a story for English listening practice. This story focuses on detecting subtle lies and the importance of trusting your intuition over someone else's words. Let's begin. The routine became a precise, silent clockwork that governed my evening. Every night, at exactly 9 o'clock, the atmosphere in my hallway shifted from open to restricted. I stood on the landing with a basket of folded laundry, the weight pressing against my hip, and stared at the white wood of the guest bedroom door. It was the third night in a row that the handle refused to turn. I gripped the brass knob and twisted, but the mechanism hit a hard, unforgiving stop. I knocked softly, assuming our houseguest might be changing. But the silence from the other side was heavy. There was no shuffle of fabric, no creak of floorboards, and no voice calling out. It was just a dead, hollow quiet that made the hair on my arms stand up. I walked downstairs to find Adam. He was on the sofa, his phone glowing against his face in the dim room. I asked him why the guest room door was locked so early in the evening. He did not look up immediately. He finished scrolling through a long paragraph, tapped the screen, and then turned to me with a practiced, easy smile. He told me that Blair valued her privacy, and that the latch was likely just sticky from the summer humidity. He said I was imagining the deadbolt being engaged. His voice was calm, steady, and completely reasonable. It made me feel small for asking. He told me to leave the laundry outside the door and relax. But I knew the difference between a sticky latch and a locked door. The next night, the pattern repeated with terrifying precision. At 10 minutes past 9, I walked past the guest room to go to the master bedroom. I tested the handle again, driven by a gnawing instinct I could not suppress. It was locked. This time, I heard a faint sound from inside. It was the soft, distinct click of a phone being set down on a hard table. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I went to find Adam, but he was not in the living room or the kitchen. The lower level of the house was empty. I returned to the upstairs hallway and stood between the closed doors. I called out his name, my voice trembling slightly in the quiet house. A moment later, the guest room door opened. Adam stepped out, looking flushed and annoyed. He pulled the door shut behind him immediately, his hand lingering on the knob as if to guard it. He told me he had been helping Blair with a stuck window. He asked why I was hovering in the hallway like a ghost. He laughed, but the sound did not reach his eyes. He guided me away from the door, his hand warm and firm on my lower back, steering me toward our room. He said I was being rude to our guest by policing her space. The tension in my chest tightened into a hard knot. I lay in bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. I knew the window in the guest room had been painted shut for 3 years. I knew Adam never fixed things without his toolbox, which I had seen sitting dusty in the garage that afternoon. I knew he was lying. The lock was not a mistake. The casual way he dismissed my concern was a carefully constructed shield. Every night, the door clicked shut, and the distance between my husband and me grew wider. I realized that the lock was not just keeping me out of a room. It was keeping me out of a secret reality that was happening right under my roof. I decided to stop asking questions and start watching the clock. The arrangement began with a conversation that felt more like a notification than a request. Adam had sat me down at the kitchen island 3 weeks earlier, his hands clasped tightly over mine, his eyes wide with an earnest intensity that usually meant he had already made a promise he could not keep. He told me that Blair was in a desperate situation. He explained that her landlord had sold her building without notice, leaving her stranded with boxes of clothes and nowhere to go. He framed it as a temporary rescue mission. He said she needed a guest room for 14 days. Just enough time to secure a new lease and move on. I had hesitated, feeling a cold ripple of unease in my stomach. But I wanted to be the supportive partner. I wanted to be the kind of wife who opened her doors to friends in crisis. I nodded, and that single nod became the permission slip for the slow erosion of my own sanctuary. Blair arrived the following evening with far more than a weekend bag. She brought 4 large suitcases, 3 overflow boxes, and a chaotic energy that immediately filled the hallway. She hugged Adam first, holding on for a few seconds longer than a standard greeting required, before turning to me with a bright, breathless thank you. She told me I was a lifesaver. She told me she would be a ghost, invisible and silent. But within 48 hours, her presence was stamped on every surface of my home. The guest bathroom, which I kept pristine for company, became a disaster zone of open cosmetic jars, damp towels left on the floor, and a lingering scent of heavy, floral perfume that drifted into the hallway. When I mentioned the mess to Adam, he told me to cut her some slack. He said she was living out of a suitcase and was under immense stress. He made me feel petty for wanting my own house to be clean. The boundaries began to dissolve in the kitchen first. I walked in on a Tuesday morning to find Blair wearing her pajamas. Standing at my coffee machine, she was holding my favorite ceramic mug, a handmade piece I had bought on our honeymoon, the one I never let anyone else use. She was sipping from it casually while scrolling on her phone. When she saw me, she did not apologize. She simply raised the mug in a toast and told me the coffee was excellent. I stood there, frozen by the audacity of it. I waited for her to realize she was holding something precious to me, but she just smiled and turned back to the counter. Later, when I told Adam, he laughed. He told me it was just a cup. He said I was being possessive over an inanimate object and that I should be happy our guest felt at home. His defense of her was immediate and reflexive, as if my discomfort was the problem, not her behavior. The dynamic in the living room shifted next. I would come home from work, exhausted and ready for quiet, only to find them already established on the sofa. They would be watching a show I had never seen, laughing at inside jokes that stopped abruptly the moment I walked through the door. The air in the room would change from warm camaraderie to a stiff, polite silence. Blair would shift slightly, pulling her legs under her, but she never moved to give me space next to my husband. Adam would look up with a glazed expression, asking me how my day was in a tone that suggested he was obligated to ask. Not interested. I would sit in the armchair, the single seat across the room, feeling like a visitor in my own marriage. They would resume their conversation, their voices dropping to a lower register, effectively cutting me out of the loop without saying a word. One evening, I came home to find the pantry rearranged. My system of organizing spices and dry goods, a system I had used for 5 years, was gone. The jars were moved to different shelves, the labels facing new directions. I felt a surge of heat rise in my cheeks. I found Blair in the backyard, reading a magazine. I asked her why she had moved my things. She looked up, unbothered, and told me she was trying to be helpful. She said my old system was inefficient, and that she had organized it by cuisine type to make cooking easier for everyone. She said it with a tone of helpful condescension, as if she were doing me a favor by fixing my flaws. When I confronted Adam about it later, he sighed loudly. He told me I was being ungrateful. He said Blair was trying to earn her keep by helping around the house, and that I was attacking her for being kind. He looked at me with disappointment, and for a moment, I questioned my own sanity. I wondered if I really was being harsh. I wondered if I was the villain in their story. The temporary 14 days came and went without a single mention of departure. On day 15, I asked Adam about her apartment search. He was brushing his teeth, avoiding eye contact in the mirror. He told me the market was tough. He said she had a few leads, but nothing solid yet. He asked me to be patient. I asked if she was actually going to viewings, as she seemed to spend every day at the house. Adam spun around, his toothbrush dripping foam, and snapped at me. He told me I was obsessing over the calendar. He said I was putting undue pressure on a woman who was already down on her luck. He made me feel cruel for counting the days. I stopped asking him, but I started watching her. I noticed that she never left the house during business hours. She spent her days lounging on the back patio, or reorganizing my closets. There were no phone calls to landlords, no rental applications on the table, no urgency in her posture. She was not a woman looking for a home. She was a woman who had already found one. The intrusion escalated to our finances in subtle ways. I noticed extra items on the grocery list, expensive snacks and premium wines that Adam and I never bought. When I asked about the receipt, Adam said he wanted to treat Blair to a nice meal since she was depressed. I pointed out that we were on a budget, saving for a renovation. He waved his hand dismissively and said we could afford a little generosity. Then came the laundry incident. I went to the utility room to switch a load from the washer to the dryer. I pulled out a wet tangle of clothes and froze. Mixed in with Adam's work shirts and gym shorts were Blair's delicate items. Her lace undergarments were twisted around his button-down shirts. I stared at the wet fabric, my stomach turning. It felt intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. It was a domestic mixing that should not exist. I separated them violently, throwing her wet clothes into a basket and leaving them damp. When Adam found them later, he asked why I hadn't dried them. I told him I didn't want to ruin her delicates. He accepted the lie, but his eyes narrowed. Assessing me, I tried to reclaim my space. I started coming home earlier, trying to beat them to the living room. I tried to initiate conversations with Adam about our future, about plans that did not include a third person. But every time I brought up a trip or a project, he would glance at Blair and say we should wait until things settled down. He deferred to her comfort before my desires. If I wanted to watch a movie, he would say Blair might not like that genre. If I wanted to order Thai food, he would say Blair preferred Italian. I was no longer the priority. I was the obstacle to their comfort. The physical boundaries eroded further. One Friday night, we were watching a movie. I sat in my armchair, watching them on the sofa. Blair was laughing at something on the screen, and she leaned over, resting her hand on Adam's knee. It wasn't a quick tap. It was a lingering placement. Her hand stayed there, warm and comfortable, for a long minute. Adam did not flinch. He did not move his leg away. He sat there, accepting the touch as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I stared at her hand, a pale claw claiming territory on my husband. I cleared my throat loudly. Blair pulled her hand back slowly, not guiltily, but casually, as if she had just realized where it was. She looked at me and smiled, a tight, thin expression that did not reach her eyes. It was a challenge. She was testing to see if I would cause a scene. I stayed silent, paralyzed by the fear of being called crazy again. But the image of her hand on his knee burned into my mind. I started feeling like a stranger in my own routine. They had developed a rhythm that excluded me. They had coffee together before I woke up. I would come downstairs to find 2 rinsed mugs in the sink, the pot empty. They had lunch together while I was at work. Adam coming home on his break to check on the house, which really meant checking on her. I found receipts for 2 lunch specials in his pocket when I did the laundry. When I asked him, he said he just swung by to make sure she was okay. He made it sound like a burden, but the receipts showed timestamps of hour-long breaks. They were building a life in the margins of my workday, a shadow marriage that existed between the hours of 9 and 5. One evening, I reached my limit with the noise. Blair was on the phone in the hallway, laughing loudly at 11 o'clock at night. I had an early meeting the next day. I walked out of the bedroom, ready to ask her to keep it down. I stopped at the top of the stairs. She was sitting on the bottom step, twirling the phone cord. We didn't have a landline, so she was twisting the charging cable of her cell. She was speaking in a low, husky voice. I heard her say that the plan was working perfectly. I heard her say that she didn't suspect a thing. I froze in the shadows of the landing. Who was she? Was it me? Blair paused, listening to the person on the other end, and then laughed again. She said she had him wrapped around her finger. My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away silently, retreating into the bedroom. I lay next to sleeping Adam, wondering if the man breathing beside me was the victim of her manipulation or the architect of it. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but the air felt thin. I watched Blair across the breakfast table. She was eating toast, looking innocent and fresh-faced. I asked her casually how her friend was doing, the one she was talking to late last night. She stopped chewing. She looked at me with wide, confused eyes. She told me she hadn't been on the phone last night. She said she went to bed at 10. I looked at Adam. He was reading the paper. He didn't look up. He said he didn't hear anything either. He said I must have been dreaming. He told me I had been stressed lately and was hearing things. The gaslighting was so smooth, so coordinated, that I almost believed them. But I knew what I heard. I knew she was lying, and I knew Adam was covering for her. The breaking point of my patience came with the mail. I had a specific system for the mail. I placed it on the console table every day. For a week, the pile had been unusually thin. I was expecting a bank statement and a renewal notice for my car insurance. They never arrived. I asked Adam if he had seen the mail. He said he brought it in, but it was just junk. I trusted him, until I came home early one day and saw Blair walking back from the driveway, shuffling through a stack of envelopes. She saw my car and quickly shoved the letters into her tote bag. She smiled and waved, pretending she had just been getting fresh air. I parked the car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. She was intercepting my mail. This was not just about a guest overstaying her welcome. This was surveillance. This was control. I walked into the house, my face a mask of calm. I greeted her, asked about her day, and watched her bag sitting on the kitchen chair. I needed to see what was in there. I needed to know what she was hiding, but I couldn't just grab it. I had to be smart. I had to wait. That night, the lock on the guest room door clicked shut at 9 o'clock, just as it always did. But this time, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the dark living room, waiting. I waited until the house settled. I waited until I was sure they were asleep. Then, I began my own investigation. I crept to the kitchen to check the recycling bin. Buried at the bottom, under a layer of coffee grounds and wet paper towels, were the torn shreds of my bank statement. I carefully picked out the pieces, ignoring the filth. I pieced enough of it together on the counter to see the truth. There were withdrawals. Cash withdrawals made at ATMs I never visited. Withdrawals made during the hours I was at work. I stared at the damp paper. The numbers were blurry, but the reality was sharp. Adam had access to that account. Blair did not, unless he gave her the card, or unless she stole it. But the text alerts went to Adam's phone, and he had never mentioned a breach. That meant he knew. He knew money was bleeding out of our savings, and he said nothing. The betrayal expanded in my chest, heavy and cold. It wasn't just an affair of the heart, it was a dismantling of my life. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the guest room where the door was locked tight. The silence of the house felt like a trap. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my identity, my assets, and my safety. I swept the paper scraps into a plastic bag and hid it in my purse. I washed my hands, scrubbing them until they were red. I walked back upstairs, past the closed guest room door, and into the master bedroom. Adam was asleep, his breathing rhythmic and peaceful. I looked at his face, the face I had loved for 7 years, and felt nothing but a cold, calculating resolve. The time for asking questions was over. The time for gathering evidence had begun. The house began to speak in a language I could not understand. It started with the ventilation system in the dead of night. I would wake up at 2 in the morning, pulled from a restless, shallow sleep by a sound that was too rhythmic to be the wind. It was a low, murmuring drone, coming from the vents, vibrating against the drywall. I would sit up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and press my ear against the cold metal of the register. It sounded like voices. Two distinct voices. One was deep and steady, the other soft and lilting. I could not make out the specific words, but the tone was intimate. It was the sound of a conversation that did not want to be heard. I woke Adam, shaking his shoulder, desperate for validation. He groaned, rolling over with a heavy, exaggerated sigh. He told me it was the furnace. He said the fan belt was slipping and creating an echo. He told me to go back to sleep and stop looking for ghosts. But the moment I laid my head back on the pillow, the murmuring stopped instantly, as if someone had flicked a switch. The invasion of my privacy moved from the common areas into the sanctuary of my hygiene. I kept my expensive face cream, a specific brand I imported for my sensitive skin, on the top shelf of the medicine cabinet behind the mirror. One morning, the jar was moved to the bottom shelf. The lid was not screwed on tight. I opened it and saw the gouge marks of fingers that were not mine. My fingers were slender. These marks were wide, scooped out with a heavy, careless hand. I felt a violation that made my stomach turn. I walked into the kitchen, holding the jar like evidence. Blair was eating yogurt at the island. I asked her if she had used my cream. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that blinked too slowly. She said she would never touch my personal items. She said I probably used it in a rush and forgot. Adam chimed in without looking up from his tablet. He said I was being petty about moisturizer. He said I was looking for reasons to hate her. I threw the jar in the trash. It cost $100, but it felt contaminated. Then the items of value started to vanish. I had a gold locket, a family heirloom from my grandmother, that I intended to pass down to a daughter one day. I kept it in a blue velvet box in my dresser drawer, hidden under my socks. I went to wear it for a work function, needing the comfort of its weight. The velvet box was there. I opened it, expecting the gleam of gold. It was empty. The shock was a physical blow to my chest. I frantically searched the drawer, dumping the contents onto the bed. Socks, scarves, mismatched earrings, but no locket. I ran downstairs, my panic rising. I told Adam the locket was gone. He didn't look up from his coffee. He told me I lost things all the time. He reminded me of the time I misplaced my car keys in the freezer. He said I was scattered. He said I probably left it at the gym. I told him I never wore it to the gym. He shrugged. He said it would turn up. Blair sat there, sipping tea, watching me unravel. She offered to help me look. Her offer felt like a taunt. We searched the house for an hour. We found nothing. 2 days later, I saw a glint of gold in Blair's room. When the door was cracked open, I pushed the door to see better, but she slammed it shut with her foot. She apologized, breathless, saying she was changing. I knew what I saw. The control tightened around my digital life. I sat down at my laptop to pay the utility bills. I typed in my password for the joint checking account. The screen flashed red. Incorrect password. I tried again, typing slowly, enunciating every keystroke. Incorrect password. I tried the backup. Account locked. I felt a cold sweat prickle my hairline. I called Adam at work. He sounded annoyed. He told me he had to change the password because of a security breach. He said he sent me the new one. I checked my texts. I checked my emails. There was nothing. He sighed, a sound of supreme patience wearing thin. He told me I must have deleted it by accident. He gave me the new password over the phone. It was Fresh Start. The word made me nauseous. I logged in. The balance was lower than I remembered, but not empty, just slowly draining, like a slow leak in a tire. The ultimate humiliation happened on a Friday. Adam had invited his boss for dinner. It was a crucial evening for his promotion. I had planned the menu for a week. I left work early to prep the roast. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a strange car. I walked into the house and smelled garlic and rosemary. The table was already set, but it wasn't set the way I did it. The napkins were folded in complex swans. The wine glasses were the crystal ones we never used. I walked into the kitchen. Blair was there, wearing an apron. She was stirring a sauce on the stove. She looked at me and smiled. She said she wanted to help, since I was so stressed. She said she took the liberty of starting the meal. Adam walked in, holding a bottle of wine. He looked at the table and beamed. He told me Blair was a lifesaver. He said I looked tired and should go freshen up. I felt like an intruder in my own kitchen. I went upstairs and changed. When I came down, the guests had arrived. Blair was pouring drinks. She was laughing at the boss's joke. She was standing next to Adam. They looked like the couple. I sat at the end of the table, silent, eating the food she cooked, listening to them praise her culinary skills. Adam didn't correct them. He didn't say his wife planned the menu. He just basked in the success of the evening. The narrative that I was mentally unstable began to take root. I was losing sleep. I was losing weight. My skin was pale, and my eyes had dark circles. I looked like a woman on the edge. Adam used this. He suggested I see a doctor. He didn't say it with kindness. He said it with concern for his own quality of life. He said my paranoia was affecting the household. He said I was making Blair uncomfortable. He said I was imagining the whispers, the missing items, the locked doors. He drove me to the appointment. He sat in the waiting room. I told the doctor I was stressed. I didn't tell him about the gaslighting. I was afraid he would think I was crazy too. The doctor prescribed sleeping pills. When we got home, Adam took the bottle. He said he would keep it safe. He said he didn't want me to accidentally take too many. He became the gatekeeper of my rest. I tried to install a camera. I bought a small, discreet nanny cam online. I hid it in the bookshelf, pointing at the hallway. I connected it to the Wi-Fi. It worked for 3 hours. I watched the feed from my desk at work. I saw Blair walking back and forth, talking on her phone. Then, the screen went black. Connection lost. I checked the app. Nothing. I rushed home. The camera was exactly where I left it. But it was unplugged. I asked Adam. He said the cleaner must have bumped it. We didn't have a cleaner. He said maybe the cat did it. We didn't have a cat. He looked at me with that pitying stare. He asked why I was spying on our guest. He said it was creepy. He said I was violating her human rights. He made me feel like the criminal. He took the camera and said he was returning it. He said I needed to trust him. I went to the garage to look for my winter coat. I saw the boxes Blair had brought. The boxes that were supposed to be full of her life. One was open. I peeked inside. It was empty. Just packing peanuts. I checked the next one. Empty. I checked the suitcases. They were nested inside each other. Empty. She hadn't brought a life to move. She had brought props. She wasn't a displaced tenant. She was a traveler with no baggage. I stood in the cold garage, my breath visible in the air. The realization hit me. She wasn't staying until she found a place. She was staying until she took mine. The mornings changed. Adam stopped kissing me goodbye. He would grab his keys and shout farewell from the door. But I would hear him talking to her in the kitchen before he left. Low, murmuring voices. A giggle. Then the front door would close. I would watch from the window. Blair would walk him to the car sometimes. She would fix his collar. She would pick lint off his jacket. They looked intimate. They looked established. One morning, she leaned in. She didn't kiss him, but she whispered something in his ear. He threw his head back and laughed. A real laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard in years. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I was the spectator. They were the main event. I called Adam's office at 2 in the afternoon. I needed to ask about the insurance bill. The receptionist answered. She knew my voice. She hesitated. She said Adam was out for the afternoon. She said he had a family emergency. I froze. I was his family. I was at work. I asked her what emergency. She said he called in and said his wife was ill. I hung up. My hands were shaking. He was using me as an excuse to be with her. I called his cell. It went to voicemail. I checked the tracker on our shared phone plan. It was disabled. Location services off. He had gone dark. When he came home that night, I confronted him. I asked where he was. He said he was at the office. I told him I called. He didn't blink. He said the receptionist was new. He said she got mixed up. He said he was in a meeting with the door closed. He turned the tables instantly. He asked why I was checking up on him. He asked if I was tracking him. He shouted that I was suffocating him. He said, my jealousy was destroying our marriage. He said Blair was right about me. I stopped. Blair was right about me? I asked what that meant. He stopped, realizing he slipped. He said Blair had noticed I was acting manic. He said she was worried about me. They were discussing my sanity. They were diagnosing me together. I felt the walls closing in. The house felt smaller. The air felt thinner. I came home to find a locksmith van in the driveway. I ran inside. The locksmith was changing the deadbolt on the front door. Adam was standing there. He said the old lock was sticking. He said he wanted to upgrade the security. He handed me a new key. It felt light and cheap. He handed Blair a key too. He gave her a key to my house. A permanent key. He said it was for convenience. So she didn't have to wait for us. I looked at the key in her hand. It was identical to mine. She closed her fingers over it. A fist of possession. She smiled at me. Now we're all safe, she said. The word safe sounded like a threat. The mail stopped coming entirely. Not just the bank statements. Everything. No flyers. No catalogs. No bills. I went to the post office. I stood in line for 40 minutes. I asked the clerk if there was a hold on my mail. She checked the computer. She said yes. A change of address request had been filed. All mail was being forwarded to a private box. I asked who authorized it. She showed me the form. It was signed by me. It was my signature. But I hadn't signed it. I stared at the forgery. It was good. It was very good. Someone had practiced my name. I felt a wave of dizziness. Identity theft? Inside my own house. I asked for the box number. She gave it to me. I drove there. It was a box inside a shipping center 3 towns over. I couldn't open it. I didn't have the key. I stood there, staring at the metal box. My life was inside there. My secrets. My money. And I was locked out. I stopped calling my friends. I was too ashamed. I didn't want to tell them my husband was gaslighting me. I didn't want to tell them I was jealous of a house guest. I isolated myself. I came home, went to the bedroom, and locked the door. But the lock on the bedroom door didn't work anymore. The mechanism was loose. Someone had tampered with it. I pushed a heavy chair under the handle. I slept in my clothes. I kept my purse under my pillow. I was a refugee in my own master suite. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen. Blair was wearing my silk robe. The one Adam bought me for our anniversary. She was drinking from my mug. She was sitting in my chair. Adam was cooking pancakes. He was humming. They looked up when I entered. They didn't look guilty. They looked annoyed that I had interrupted. Adam asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. I looked at Blair. I told her to take off my robe. She laughed. She said I was being dramatic. She said she spilled coffee on hers and borrowed mine. She said she would wash it. Adam slammed the spatula down. He shouted at me. He said I was being a monster. He said I was treating a guest like a criminal. He said he couldn't take my behavior anymore. He said maybe I should stay at a hotel for a few days to cool off. He was kicking me out. He was kicking me out of my own house. I looked at them. The united front. The wall of lies. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me snapped. But it wasn't a break. It was a setting into place. A cold, hard gear engaged in my mind. I nodded. I said okay. I said maybe he was right. I said I would go pack a bag. I walked upstairs. I didn't pack clothes. I packed my laptop. I packed my hard drive. I packed the old phone I kept in the drawer. I was going to find the truth, and I was going to burn their little world to the ground. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a held breath. I drove away from the driveway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, watching the rearview mirror until the roof of my home disappeared behind the trees. I wasn't going to a hotel. I wasn't going to retreat. I was going to war. I parked 3 streets over, under the heavy shade of an oak tree, and waited. I watched the clock on the dashboard. 30 minutes. 40. Then, I saw them. Adam's car rolled past the intersection, heading toward the highway. Blair was in the passenger seat, her feet on the dashboard, laughing at something he said. They looked carefree. They looked like they had already won. I waited another 10 minutes to be safe. Then I drove back. I didn't park in the driveway. I pulled into the alley behind the house, shielding my car behind the overgrown hedges of the neighbor's fence. I walked to the back door, the key feeling heavy and cold in my hand. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The air in the house was stale, heavy with the scent of her perfume, a cloying, powdery vanilla that seemed to coat the back of my throat. I stood in the kitchen, listening. The refrigerator hummed. A floorboard settled. I was alone. I went straight to the guest room door. This was the fortress. I knelt down and examined the lock. Up close. The evidence was undeniable. The wood around the strike plate was raw and splintered, covered in jagged, fresh scratches. It wasn't just a sticky latch. Someone had taken a tool to the frame, gouging out space for a heavy-duty deadbolt that didn't belong on an interior door. I ran my fingers over the marks. They were violent, hasty. This wasn't a repair. It was a fortification. I pressed my ear to the wood. I could hear the faint hum of electronics from inside. A server? A fan? I needed to get in, but I couldn't break the door down without alerting them later. I needed a different way. I went to the garage and found the ladder. I carried it to the side of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The guest room window was on the second floor. I extended the ladder, the metal clanking softly, sound that seemed deafening in the quiet afternoon. I climbed. The window was painted shut, or so Adam had said. I pulled a putty knife from my pocket and wedged it under the sash. I worked it back and forth, breaking the seal of the paint. It gave way with a sharp crack. I pushed. The window slid up. I climbed over the sill and dropped into the room. It was icy cold. The air conditioning vent was taped open. I looked around, and the breath left my lungs. The room had been stripped. The bed was dismantled and leaned against the wall. In its place was a command center. 3 monitors sat on a folding table, all glowing with screensavers. Cables snaked across the floor like black vines. This wasn't a guest room. It was an office, and it was active. I woke the center screen. It was password protected, but I looked at the keyboard. The keys for times A asterisk, asterisk, D asterisk, asterisk, M asterisk, and times 1 times were worn shiny. Asterisk, Adam, 1 asterisk. I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I was staring at a spreadsheet titled Liquidation Timeline. I scrolled, my eyes widening in horror. It was a list of my assets. My car, sell by 15th. My grandmother's jewelry, pawned, ticket hash 4092. My retirement fund, transfer pending. They weren't just living off me. They were systematically stripping me down to zero. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. I photographed the screen. I photographed the pawn tickets lying on the desk. I opened his email. There was a thread with a realtor. Listing agreement, draft. He was selling the house. My house. The house I bought before I met him. He had forged my signature on the power of attorney. I saw the PDF. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The day Blair arrived. It was all planned. I heard a noise. A car door slamming outside. I froze. I rushed to the window and peered through the blinds. It was just a delivery truck, but the adrenaline spike made me dizzy. I needed to move faster. I saw a stack of mail on the corner of the desk. My mail. The missing bank statements. The insurance notices. They were all there, opened and sorted. I grabbed the stack. I saw a small black notebook next to the keyboard. I opened it. It was a log. Day 1. She suspects nothing. Day 5. Gaslighting, effective. She doubts her memory. Day 12. Isolated from friends. It was a diary of my destruction. Handwritten by Blair. I shoved the notebook and the mail into my bag. I needed digital proof. I saw a flash drive plugged into the tower. I pulled it out. I didn't know what was on it, but I wasn't leaving it behind. I looked around the room one last time. I saw a calendar on the wall. Next Friday's date was circled in red ink. Final transfer. Departure. That was 4 days away. The clock was ticking louder than I realized. I climbed back out the window, shutting it as best as I could. I collapsed the ladder and returned it to the garage. My hands were covered in dust and sweat. I needed to get out of the house, but I needed one more thing. I needed to know what they were saying when I wasn't there. I ran to the living room. I reached under the sofa and felt for the fabric lining. I used a piece of duct tape to secure my phone. Set to voice record. To the underside of the frame. It would run for hours. I drove to the public library 3 towns over. I found a corner table and plugged in the flash drive. I opened the files. It was worse than theft. It was a dossier. There were photos of me sleeping, photos of me looking disheveled, audio recordings of me crying, edited to make me sound hysterical. They were building a case for my commitment. There were emails to a psychiatrist, posing as Adam, describing my descent into madness. They weren't just going to leave me broke. They were going to leave me institutionalized so I couldn't fight back. I sat there, the cold light of the library monitor illuminating my face, and I felt the tears dry up. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness. And I had the evidence. I copied everything to a cloud account. I emailed the files to my work address. I emailed them to my sister. I created 3 backups. I was not going to lose this. I needed to verify the neighbor angle. I remembered Mrs. Higgins. She was the neighborhood watch. She saw everything. I packed up and drove back. I saw her in her garden, deadheading roses. I walked up to the fence. I asked her, keeping my voice casual, if she had seen any contractors at my house lately. She looked at me with those sad, pitying eyes. She patted my hand over the fence. "Oh, honey," she said, You don't have to pretend with me. Adam told me everything. What did he tell you? I asked, my blood running cold. About the divorce, she said softly. And his new fiancée moving in. He said you were having a hard time letting go. He said you were staying in the guest room until you found a place. The world tilted. He told the neighbors I times was the guest. Asterisk. I times was the squatter. In my own home. Blair was the fiancé. That's why no one said anything. That's why they looked away. He had rewritten reality before the crime even started. I thanked Mrs. Higgins, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. I told her Adam was confused. I asked her if she would mind writing down exactly what he said. Just for my records. She hesitated, then nodded. If it helps, dear. She wrote it on a notepad. I took the paper. It was another nail in his coffin. I returned to the house before they got home. I retrieved my phone from under the sofa. I stopped the recording and played the last hour. I put in my earbuds. I heard the front door open. I heard their footsteps. Did she take the bait? Blair's voice. Hook, line, and sinker? Adam replied. She thinks she's crazy. I moved her keys again today. She spent 20 minutes crying in the hallway. Blair laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. God, she's pathetic. Is the bank ready for Friday? Everything is set. We sign the papers, wire the funds to the offshore account. And then we call the police to have her removed. We'll show them the medical files. They'll take her straight to the ward. I stopped the tape. I had it. The confession. The plan. The timeline. Friday. I had 4 days. No, I had 3. Today was Monday. I needed a lawyer, a shark. I found the number for a fierce litigator I had read about in the papers. I called her office. I told the receptionist. I had a fraud case involving imminent asset liquidation and identity theft. I got an appointment for the next morning. I spent the night in the house. Lying in the master bedroom, with the door wedged shut with a chair. I listened to them downstairs. They were cooking dinner. They were watching TV. They were living my life. I fingered the flash drive in my pocket. I looked at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I plotted. I visualized the takedown. I planned every word I would say. The next morning, I met the lawyer, Miss Vance. She was terrifying and brilliant. I laid it all out. The photos, the spreadsheet, the recording, the neighbor's note. She listened in silence. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. We have enough for a restraining order, she said. But that just stops them. You want to destroy them? I want everything back, I said. And I want them in handcuffs. Then we let them walk into the trap, she said. The bank transfer is the felony trigger. Attempted fraud is one thing. Wire fraud is federal. We wait for Friday. She made a call to the district attorney. She made a call to the bank's fraud department. The trap was set. But I had to go back. I had to live with them for 3 more days. I had to act like the broken, confused wife. I had to let them think they were winning. I went home. I played my part. I wandered the halls with red-rimmed eyes. I asked Adam where my keys were. I let him find them for me. I thanked him. I saw the smirk he shared with Blair. I let them have it. I let them gloat. On Thursday night, the air in the house was electric. They were giddy. They were packing boxes. Not for them, but for me. They were packing my things to throw out. I stood in the doorway of the living room. Adam, I said, my voice trembling perfectly. I feel like something big is going to happen tomorrow. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. You're just anxious, Sophie. Tomorrow is just another day. Go to sleep. Okay, I whispered. Good night. I went upstairs. I didn't go to sleep. I put on my best suit. I packed my essential documents. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the sun rise on Friday morning. The sky was bleeding red. It was Judgment Day. I heard Adam's alarm go off. I heard the shower. I heard him singing. He thought he was walking into a payday. He didn't know he was walking into a cage. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive calm. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Oblivious to the storm that was about to break, I walked downstairs at 8 o'clock sharp. I was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers, my hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun. I held a leather portfolio under my arm. The change in my appearance was the first crack in their reality. Adam and Blair were in the kitchen. They were drinking mimosas, celebrating early. They froze when they saw me. Blair's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Adam stared at my suit. "Going to a funeral?" he joked, but the uneasiness leaked into his voice. "A closing." I corrected him. Specifically, the closing of this chapter. I tossed the portfolio onto the kitchen island. It landed with a heavy slap. "What is this?" Adam asked, his smile faltering. "Open it," I said. He opened the folder. The first page was the bank log showing the unauthorized withdrawals. The second was the photo of the liquidation timeline. The third was the transcript of their conversation from the night before. His face went gray. The color drained out of him so fast, he looked like a wax figure. Blair leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes widened. She gasped, a small, pathetic sound. "You've been busy," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, forgery. Sophie." "Wait," Adam stammered, stepping back. "This isn't what it looks like. It's a misunderstanding. We were planning a surprise. For your birthday." "My birthday is in November," I said, "and I don't think federal prison is a gift." I pointed to the window. 2 police cruisers pulled silently into the driveway. The lights were flashing, blue and red painting the kitchen walls. "I didn't call the doctor, Adam. I called the FBI's fraud division. Ms. Vance has already sent over the digital evidence from the flash drive you so carelessly left plugged in." Blair dropped her glass. It shattered on the tile, orange juice and champagne splashing over her expensive shoes. She bolted for the back door. "I wouldn't," I said. "There's an officer at the back gate." She stopped, trapped. She turned on Adam. "You said she was stupid. You said she didn't know anything." "Shut up!" Adam roared at her. He looked at me, desperate. "Sophie, please. We can fix this." I was confused. She made me do it. She manipulated me. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow laugh. "You're not the victim, Adam. You're the architect. But now you're just the defendant." The front door burst open. "Police! Search warrant!" Officers swarmed the hallway. I stepped back, leaning against the counter, watching the chaos unfold. They handcuffed Adam first. He was crying now, ugly, sobbing tears, begging me to tell them it was a mistake. I didn't look at him. I looked at the officer and nodded. "That's him," I said. They handcuffed Blair next. She was screaming, cursing at me, cursing at Adam. She looked wild, her mask of composure completely gone. As they dragged them out, Adam twisted in the grip of the officer. "Sophie, the house. We'll lose the house." "No," I said softly. "You'll lose the house. I already filed for an emergency annulment and a freeze on all assets. The house is mine. It always was." The door closed behind them. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was empty. I walked to the guest room. I looked at the scratch marks on the door frame. I walked inside. The computers were gone, seized as evidence. The room was just a room again. I went to the window and opened it wide, letting the fresh air blow out the stale smell of conspiracy. I went downstairs and picked up the broken glass from the floor. I swept the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee. I sat at the island, alone, drinking from my favorite ceramic mug, the one Blair had used. I washed it 3 times before I poured the coffee. My phone buzzed. It was Miss Silliu. "Vance. They're in custody," she said. "Bail is set at $500,000 each. They won't make it. The evidence is airtight." "Thank you," I said. "Are you okay?" she asked. I looked around my quiet, empty house. The sunlight was brighter now. The shadows were gone. "Yes," I said. "I'm finally home." I hung up. I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. It clicked smoothly. I was safe. The lock was no longer a barrier to keep me out. It was a shield to keep me safe. I took a deep breath. The nightmare was over. The waking up had just begun. And for the first time in months, the air tasted sweet.